This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. Today on the show, I have a repeat guest, Mark Melin. Mark is the author of several books. He is considered a managed futures expert. But I think these days, Mark, and he also writes for Opalesque, Mark is also a guy who is got his finger to the pulse of all the nasty stuff that's going on behind the scenes in the markets, specifically these days, the OTC markets, and he's quite a wealth of knowledge and information on MF Global. Mark, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here again.
So, you've got this piece coming out here in the Opalesque publication called The Untold Story. Brooksley Born, Larry Summers, Leverage Design Flaws That Persist Today, and Unlimited Risk Potential. Some of these names are known by people, some of them are not, these personal names. But I think what you've really been working on, and I'm going to summarize here, is that for most people out there, they understand there's exchanges, there's stock exchanges, there's futures exchanges, and you can go trade on these, and they're regulated, and there's some transparency, and people can understand to some degree the equation, so to speak, the balancing side of each equation. However, in the world that you've been working in, the research you've been digging in, the over-the-counter derivatives, the derivatives that are structured amongst the big banks, amongst themselves and other big clients, this off the balance sheet, so to speak, unregulated world that leaves us all at a point in time where there could be another bailout or another implosion. Am I going in the right direction of where you've been sniffing for the last bunch of months?
Absolutely, Michael. And I think it's important that we simplify the message so that people can understand the real risks in the world today and manage appropriately. What happened with these unregulated derivatives, they imploded in 1998 with long-term capital management. Then they imploded again in 2007, 2008 with a more damaging market crash. The message I think people have to understand today is if the problems that were initially identified by Brooksley Born in 1998 are not properly addressed, the next market catastrophe that we could have could be worse than anything that has preceded it. And when you understand the derivative structure, and I don't want to get too wonky and too complicated, but when you understand the basics of the derivative structures that underlie Europe, and you follow the debt crisis, which you and I have discussed ad nauseum for at least a couple years, you realize that there's going to be an intersection. This isn't a prediction with a crystal ball, it's just logical math. In a debt crisis, a lot of the derivatives that are supporting the European financial system have potential to collapse. It's very important that our leaders essentially look at this problem from a new perspective and start to implement some of the logical changes that Brooksley Born identified in 1998.
Okay, let me stop you there. So, I'm a guy that grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. Okay, I have a pretty decent idea for how that place works. Okay, the people in that town don't make decisions based on what's good for their constituents. It just doesn't happen that way. They make decisions based on being able to get reelected because they enjoy sitting in the chair of power. That is their motivation. And if you had a differing opinion, that's fine. We'd have an all-day disagreement about that. But that's what their motivation is. So if we're really at a situation where most of these people don't give a blank about the situation, we know there's this unregulated tidal wave of interbank OTC derivatives floating out there, and we know it's going to implode. So why are you so optimistic that these people that aren't even motivated for any kind of altruistic good, why are you so motivated that they're going to do anything?
Okay, that's the point of this article. a number of people have, throughout the past 10 years, pointed out the dangers. Why I'm writing this article and why I want to raise this issue, let's call them out now. Let's provide the appropriate warning, and then when the catastrophe does come, those who are in office will be held accountable, hopefully. You know, I'm not the only one that has made this call. Warren Buffett made the call. Bill Cohen, a journalist who used to work at Goldman Sachs, has made the call. I mean, there are a number of people who have essentially identified this problem. Why this is an issue now is the clock is ticking, and the probability tables on a debt crisis in Europe have started to tip in the favor of that occurring if action isn't taken. You know, so think about this in terms of a trade, Michael. You and I have always analyzed risk-reward. That's what we do in managed futures. That's what you do in trend following. So the way I look at this looks like a Corzine trade to me, okay? The probability of a major problem is high, and the risk is catastrophic. And there are no attempts that I can see at this point to correct the problem. And so what I outlined in the article is I think we need a commission of industry experts to develop a plan, because the U.S. debt crisis, we keep talking about Europe, but the U.S. isn't in that different of a situation. And we're going to come to a point after the election where they're going to start to negotiate the debt crisis. And right now, my sources tell me they're very far apart.
Okay, Mark, slow down for a second. Slow down for a sec. Okay. So you make this statement. You say they're going to be held accountable. How is a politician held accountable? Just don't answer for a second. A politician is held accountable by leaving office. Okay, that's it. They leave office. They don't go to jail. Corzine was a governor, senator, right? He's everything. He was the head of MF Global. He imploded the system. All these people are out, all this money. You know more about it than I do and more than average people do. But the bottom line is no repercussions, okay? If all of this happens, what are they going to be the repercussions for any politician? There aren't going to be any. There's not going to be any. They'll lose all.
Other than an election.
Okay, that's nothing. But that's nothing.
Aware of this problem and allowed it to occur.
Oh, okay, but they lose the election. So what? So what? So now what are we left with?
That's their whole game.
Okay, but I don't care about their game. Your average reader doesn't. The average listener doesn't. They care about their pocketbook. Okay? So what? I mean, do you really, really believe in your heart of hearts that this can be stopped? Do you really believe that?
I think that there can be risk management put in place. I think that the blow can be cushioned. We're on a debt roller coaster where the governments all across the Western world have been encouraged to spend significantly more than their revenues. I think there are a number of people, and I'm not the only one with this voice, we're trying to turn a ship around slowly. It is better to turn a ship around slowly than to try and turn the Titanic on a dime. It can't happen. And yet that's what you're starting to see over in Greece and over in Spain. In Greece, I saw a study the other day that said the New Dawn Party, which is the Nazi party, is now garnering over 20% of the vote. Look, we've got problems. They need to be addressed. Otherwise, the risks can be catastrophic. Now, what I'm saying is, and what people such as David Walker, who's going around the country talking about the debt crisis, we've got to address these issues. There could be catastrophic consequences.
Okay, so let's, we're on the same page, and we agree there can be catastrophic consequences. But let's talk about for a second a way that the average person can digest this. And we talked about it earlier. Right now, America is a really simple place. America is a really simple place, in my mind, as long as the Dow stays at a certain level or feels like it's moving up. The vast majority of Americans that have mutual fund buy and hold exposure are satiated. They're content. Now, perhaps their mutual funds have really not gained any since, frankly, long-term capital management. Maybe they've been flat 14 years. But as long as they feel like the principal is there, The average American seemingly is willing to give up everything. And what I mean by everything is, first off, if they've saved for 30 years, they've given up all interest income. That's just gone. Okay. And their equity positions really aren't growing. They're just kind of held steady for more than a decade. So where does that leave us? It leaves us a situation where, and we talked about this also, where I think there's four political parties. There's Democrats, there's Republicans, there's Libertarians, and then there's the bankers. And but I mean, seriously, right? But I mean, if you really look at it from that perspective, then can they be defeated? Because, you can't vote the bankers out. You saw Bernanke, was it last week? Congress tried to ask him a few questions, and you hear the word audit, and he's basically like, shut up and go away. I run the show here, little boys.
Okay, well, now I'm going to start to talk about some inside situations that aren't necessarily public. There are a number of people on Wall Street who have said to me, Mark, the wrong people are in charge. And what we have to do is identify these people and just put new people in. Obama had an amazing opportunity. He was going in that direction in 2008, and then the bank lobby, which has been commonly referred to as the blob, essentially got their people in. And when I say bank lobby, it's very interesting to look at the banks, because even the banks with a systematic guarantee have different motivations. It's really the banks that are trading OTC who have the guarantee, the failure guarantee from the U.S. government that are really going to be at danger here. And what's going to potentially happen is when the debt crisis in Europe starts to implode, if that happens, these banks are going to be exposing the U.S. government to unlimited loss potential. And here's an issue. No one can tell you right now what the limit of the U.S. government loss is. And that is a problem that needs to be corrected. Now, I know there are people in high positions on Wall Street who know that this is wrong. They know that a lot of the illegality that appears to have taken place with MF Global is wrong. They know the way that the system is set up. It's set up for a major catastrophe. They're trying to change it.
Okay. Slow down for a sec. Once again, I have a decent feel for politics. They are trying to change it. There's this system we have to trust. Obama did something, Bush did something. The reality is it just keeps marching along. And over the last dozen years, we have seen, from a simple perspective, we've seen rate manipulation designed to rig the Dow to a certain level, which keeps the people happy. And if the people are happy, they really don't care what Mark Melin has to say, right? I mean, seriously, as long as the Dow remains high, Mark, you're beating a horse that's no one's listening. So the question I have for you is, let's say the perspective that you have, this debt bomb that's out there, this OTC derivative bomb, which for the average person is hard to wrap their arms around. Let's say it all implodes. I want to hear just very specifically in man on the street language, what can happen? Are we talking about your ATM doesn't work? Your direct deposit doesn't work? What happens specifically?
Okay, there are a range of possibilities, and none of what I'm saying is a certainty. The future is never certain, regardless of how it looks. But there are a range of possibilities. At the outer end of that range of possibilities is the 1933 Germany scenario. Are you familiar with what occurred in 1933 in Germany?
Well, there's a tad bit of chaos that led to the rise of a guy named Hitler.
Exactly. Now, that is a one realistic possibility. Because, look, if the debt crisis implodes and then these large banks, which have not disclosed their real risk that they are aware to the government, and there's no central coordinating force that knows the total exposure of these risks. Goldman Sachs knows the extent of their risk. JP Morgan knows the extent of their risk. Citibank knows the extent of their risk, but no one knows the total implosion potential. And when you're talking about a derivative contract, don't forget these derivative contracts, just like a futures contract that you get on an exchange, can represent unknown loss potential. So right now we have a situation where the U.S. government is backing these 2-3 institutions, and the loss potential that could hit the U.S. government could be catastrophic. Now, just put this in perspective, because in 3 to 5 years, there are going to be drains on the budget like we have never seen. Seniors are going to start to retire in massive numbers, the baby boomers. They're going to start to retire and draw on Social Security, money that's not there. We could also see a rise in interest rates at some point. The Federal Reserve can't keep interest rates at near zero levels forever, regardless of what they say. At some point, we're going to see a rise in interest rates. The probability tables that I'm looking at, which aren't absolute, but they're probability tables, say that a rise in interest rates may occur in 3 to 5 years. So look at all the drains on the budget and then calculate a potential implosion of these banks due to credit derivatives. It's too much for anyone to handle.
So, Mark, I hear you about the big picture, okay? But the little guy who is ultimately the person you want to reach, it's not just the hedge fund community. It's not just lawmakers and bankers. And let's face it, clearly, people at Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan don't really want to know or hear about Mark Melin's message. That's not good for business. Okay. So for the average guy, though, who sees the Dow at whatever level it is at this exact moment, pretty close to all-time highs, why should he care? Like, what's going to be, okay, yeah, baby boomers are going to retire. So what? I mean, they're still going to get their Social Security check. When does this stop working to where, I mean, if the average guy doesn't see his either the money in his bank account disappear or doesn't see the Dow go to 6,000, the average guy doesn't give a shit.
What I'm saying is that has potential to happen. MF Global's shown us that the money in the account has potential to disappear. The Dow going to 6,000 has significant, that's potentially in the cards in a serious implosion. And Social Security, which you mentioned, that money is gone by and large, and baby booming seniors are going to be retiring in tremendous numbers in 3 to 5 years. The money's just not there.
I guess the hard part that you and I both see, and we're both on the same page trying to get this message out to audiences that we perhaps both perceive these audiences as slightly different or how they can understand what we're getting at. But I'm trying to think of what's a way that the average guy, a dentist making $150,000, a school teacher with a pension in California, what can they do to protect themselves? Because clearly they can vote Democrat, they can vote Republican, they can vote Libertarian, but they can't vote banker. So they can't control they can't control any of that. They can't control any of that with their vote. And I'm not so sure whether they vote for Obama or Romney that affects anything either. So what can the average person do in this situation other than just sit around and wait for the sky to fall?
Well, I don't want to necessarily term it as the sky is falling. I'm hoping that the message can get out so that corrective action can start to be taken. And what can the average individual do? I think the average individual at least needs to be aware of it. I think surprising the general population with a debt crisis and with implosion issues like this is not positive. You talk about pensions. Pensions can potentially be significantly damaged in a situation that we are discussing. So I think it's important that, A, people are aware. B, my primary goal is to induce positive change. And I'm hoping that the leaders of our country, and there are political leaders, and then there are leaders who are running the mechanisms in Washington, D.C., and leaders who are running mechanisms on Wall Street. hopefully we can induce some positive change so that we steer the ship in the right direction. And I'm not the only one that's making this appeal.
How do you get past skeptics like me who just kind of see this system, this matrix, this machine just marching forward no matter what? How do we? I mean, you do recognize.
All I'm doing is telling the truth.
I know, but you recognize. Hold on.
I'm with you on seeing the matrix and the machine marching through. I mean, just on Saturday, there was an article in the New York Times that said that the MF Global investigation had concluded without any criminal wrongdoing being found among the top executives. And it didn't even attribute that statement. You know, is it the CFTC that ended the investigation? Is it the FBI? Who at the CFTC investigated this and determined that an event that clearly damaged the markets more than any event I have ever seen didn't have criminal wrongdoing behind it? You know, so I'm with you on the matrix marching forward. I think at a minimum, we need to speak up. At a minimum, you need to say something. If you are aware of criminal activity that has occurred, you know, is silence a crime? That's a question that I think needs to be answered in both the context of MF Global and in context of the debt crisis, because what's interesting, both the people involved are primarily the same people. If you looked at who was involved in 1998, the same players are involved to different extents in MF Global. So, I mean, making those connections, I think, is very interesting. And, you know, I think there's a ship that needs to be turned around. And, you know, this is a large ship like the Titanic. It can't be turned around on a dime. We have to be thoughtful and we have to be practical about it.
Okay, so you are, and I give you credit for this, you are being very optimistic and you are trying to lead a way of thought to get people to fix something before an implosion. And I think we don't need to go into it now, but I think you would probably say that the math behind the implosion is painfully obvious. The math. Literally, there is no other option unless you fix something. Now I'm on the other side of the equation. I am the skeptic who really doesn't believe that anything will change until an event happens. And I think what you're outlining, and we talked about this earlier, is you're outlining what you see is either one or two or three black swans swimming around out there, ready to come in and bite us, you know where. And so, but for me, I'm not so sure, regardless of whether or not the problem can be isolated or thought through as you have. When people see the article you've done in Opalesque, I mean, clearly you've done the homework, you've isolated it. But I just don't know if people are going to pay attention. I actually don't think people will pay attention. I don't think they'll pay attention until the implosion. And then maybe you can write that really cool book that goes back and shows everybody that, hey, my name's Mark Melin. I saw this actually a few years before it happened and no one cared to listen. And that guy Covel, he just kept saying he wanted to see it happen anyways. So,
no, I don't want to see it happen.
I do want to see it happen. I do. Hold on, Mark. Look, I do want to see it happen.
Do what I can. We have to do what we can.
But I want to see it happen. I absolutely want to see it happen. And I'll tell you why.
I don't think you want this one. I think society changes.
The
worst case scenario, I think, is a very bad case scenario. And I personally like the United States. I don't want to see a repressive government. I want the economy to flourish. I want the banks to be healthy. And I think we have to speak out in order to hopefully make that happen. And I'll tell you what, if speaking out doesn't change that, at least we're recording it for history. Let's give the people a warning, just like they've received warnings in the past. And then history can appropriately judge them that a valid warning was given, and again, they ignored it. You
know, Mark, every time I go through the airport, TSA wants to put their hands in my underwear because they tell me they're looking for Al-Qaeda. So when you say that potentially that we have a repressive government, they're building a facility because I have my assistant. She has a close relative who has seen this facility up in Utah that the NSA is building to basically eavesdrop on every last thing that there possibly could happen. So in between recording and categorizing every last thing that there is for some system to follow everything, like I said, the flying, just checking to see if there's something going on down there. I don't know. I know where you're going, that an implosion could be catastrophic. But, I sometimes think that one of the problems that we've had in the last bunch of years is not allowing the system to cleanse, not allowing it to clear. And that perhaps the system, regardless of the end result, needs to cleanse and needs to clear. And I'm confident that even if the system cleansed and if it cleared and it produced a massive amount of poverty, I am confident that perhaps the Constitution would survive.
There's no way to know what would happen. And, I think in the short term, you asked me what individual people can do. I think, for one, they should be looking at managed futures and looking at other investments uncorrelated to the performance of the stock market. I think that pensions that are exposed to the economic environment of market prosperity need to be diversified. So I think on a practical level, that's what can be done. And I think people need to be aware of this. There are people inside Washington, D.C. and Wall Street who know the score. They know what's going on. And to not inform the general population about mathematical probability, to me, seems criminal.
Well, but what if it's not criminal? What if it's literally just power-hungry politicians and power-hungry bankers that are looking to keep an edge to themselves? And what if it's not criminal? What if it's just mean? What if it's just nasty? What if it's just unethical? What if it's not criminal?
No. I don't think it is criminal. It's criminal from a moral standpoint. Now there are like with MF Global, if certain people are aware that a criminal act has taken place and they're silent on it, my understanding of the law, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of the law is that it's criminal from a certain perspective and with certain people. So, is the debt crisis criminal? No, I don't think so. I'm not a lawyer, but I think it's morally corrupt.
Mark, you were giving solutions like managed futures, and obviously one of the biggest components of managed futures is something called trend following, something that I write a little bit about and practice and preach about. But I think you're right. I think on a practical level, if on your optimistic side of the equation, if things can't change, and if we're left to my side of the equation where the black swan's got to swim in and bite before anything happens, then I think you're right. Investments that are not typical, that move differently than the ones that are engineered by the Fed, i.e. stocks, is a very smart move.
Absolutely. And as you know, I've been in this industry advocating that financial advisors and qualified individuals understand managed futures. I think the first place to start is with education. Understand why performance is generated. Understand these beta risk factors, and then you can set performance expectations to a reasonable degree. And at least you'll have an idea of why a strategy might or might not be working. So at the end of the day, it all kind of dovetails to what's been my passion for quite some time.
Well, it's interesting when we talk about things like managed futures and trend following, and when you see where the Dow got to in March of 2009, and then we all know what has happened since March of 2009, QE infinity, all designed for one purpose, which was to bring equity indices back up to a level to where the majority mainstream public that had buy and hold investments could feel comfortable that their principal was back. That when you're facing that wall and you're facing the power of the Fed that has the ability to do that and have clearly done that, it's very difficult to make the case for, I think, some of the worlds that you and I occupy in. And that's now as I say that, I always have to catch myself because from a trend following perspective, none of what I just said is a tradable event. I'm not trying to predict anything. I'm just discussing with Mark a broad political macro view that's taking place and clearly has taken place. From a trading perspective, there's nothing I've said today in this conversation from a trend following standpoint that's remotely useful.
Exactly.
Except to know that from a trend following perspective, then when the events that Mark is talking about happen, trend following will be the big winner. That's the only thing that's useful.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, in managed futures, most of the program managers, the fund managers, aren't predicting the future with a crystal ball. We're looking at mathematical probability tables based on past performance and making adjustments to a portfolio based on that. It's really logical and practical, and there's not much mysticism to it based on my experience.
Yeah, I would say that the mysticism, at least in the trend following space, doesn't exist, and that's a whole different issue that I think is nice about trend following and the managed futures practitioners that are very similar to trend following, which is the lack of mysticism, the lack of funny stuff, so to speak.
Well, it's been amazing to watch how managed futures has grown. I was talking to someone the other day, and they said to me, Mark, there's a point at which managed futures just can't handle any more capacity. And I said, well, you know what? Approximately 10 years ago, we were at $40 billion in assets under management. Now we're approaching $325 billion plus. And through all that phenomenal growth, which is the highest growth rate among any asset class in the alternative investment space, through all that phenomenal growth, there really hasn't been much of a hiccup. 2008 was a phenomenal example of how managed futures performed. There were market stresses everywhere. People were using managed futures as an ATM. They were taking money out to fund their other investments that were losing. And even with all that stress, the system held through. Now we see MF Global and a much smaller incident, PFG, and I believe that the system can hold on. I think the system can shine. I think we just have to be diligent to work for positive outcomes.
Well, Mark, I'm going to get this podcast up ASAP. What I love talking about you is that you can be the optimist and I will be the skeptic, and you can have faith in the corridors of DC and the banking sector that they will get their act together and solve the issues that you have so painstakingly detailed in your article called The Untold Story. However, on my side of the world, and this is actually a very Zen perspective, I think it will just all happen as it happens, and the chips shall fall where they may. Isn't that a happy thought for the day?
Well, I tend to agree with you. The chips will fall where they may, but at the very minimum, I want to make sure that if I am aware of something that has a probability, I am at least providing information on it, and hopefully appropriate action is going to be taken. We can't control that. I can only do in my little itsy-bitsy corner of the world the best that I can do. That's it.
Hey, Mark, where can people read this article that you wrote called The Untold Story?
Well, they can go to opalesque.com and then scroll to the bottom of the page, and you'll see something for Opalesque Futures Intelligence, and just click through to that, and they can find the article. Okay.
Also, where can they find out more about you or connect with you on Twitter or whatnot? Where can they reach you?
That's a great place, is Twitter. My Twitter handle is Mark Melin, so it's at MarkMelin. And from that Twitter location, you can get to my website. I will post links to this article on my Twitter, so that's a very good place to get a hold of me.
I got to tell you, it is the article you want to read. That if you are sitting out there and you're saying to yourself, well, Covel and Melin, I really don't need any of what you're talking about because buy and hold is done great. I don't care about all this interest rate stuff. It doesn't make a difference to me. Look where the Dow is. If you're one of those people that have that view and you actually think everything's just going to be rosy for the rest of your life, you might want to read Mark's article and actually just prepare for something different than the rosy scenario that you have of stocks going up forever. It's a fair assessment, right, Mark?
Absolutely. The Fed cannot prop up the stock market forever. At some point, gravity takes over.
Got to have another plan. Got to have another system when that happens. So, and you can't know or you can't predict it either. That's the other trick to the whole thing. Hey, Mark, listen, it was good talking. I'll get this up ASAP and we will talk soon.
Likewise. Take care.
See ya.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.